Hello everyone and welcome. This webinar has been prepared to provide an introduction to the thinking that sits behind your school's engagement with Melbourne Metrics, the challenge that has brought many schools to engage with this work, the core ideas that underpin it, and the principles that shape the tools and resources you may encounter through your collaboration with us. Many schools find it helpful to have a shared introductory resource like this that can be used with colleagues, particularly those new to the work, so that there is common understanding of the ambitions and ideas being brought to life across schools. At the heart of Melbourne Metrics is a challenge that education systems around the world are now grappling with. Put simply, it is the question of how we ensure that the ways we assess and recognise learning genuinely reflect and support the development of the kinds of competencies that young people need to thrive in a contemporary world. Over generations, education systems have developed sophisticated ways of assessing and credentialing the attainment of disciplinary skills and knowledge. That work remains a key feature of education. But alongside this, schools know that students are also developing a complex and transferable learning competencies, or a suite of learning competencies that enable them to navigate an increasingly complex landscape. Young people are growing up in a world shaped by rapid technological change that is transforming how knowledge is created and applied. They are navigating globally interconnected societies and facing environmental and geopolitical challenges that require really thoughtful and informed participation. And at the same time, the nature of work is shifting rapidly, with many future roles and industries yet to emerge. Hence, schools are thinking carefully about how to support the purposeful development of transferable learning competencies in their students. Competencies such as their capacity to exercise agency in learning, to communicate effectively, to collaborate with others, act ethically, and think critically and creatively. Schools know that these competencies matter deeply, yet historically they have been or often regarded as important, but difficult to assess and recognise in robust and credible ways. And this creates a real tension, because what education systems choose to formally assess and recognise inevitably shapes what receives attention in classrooms, where teachers place their gaze, what is communicated to families, and what ultimately counts when decisions are made about learners' futures. The core proposition behind Melbourne Metrics is that assessment and recognition systems can evolve so that they better capture and communicate these complex competencies alongside disciplinary knowledge. Importantly, this work also asks us to reconsider the role that assessment itself plays in education. Look, across a broad range of engagements and across many years, we have heard different stakeholders in education really tell us what's on their minds in this area. School leaders are asking how they can fully prepare all students for an unknown future, how they can provide the enabling conditions within their settings for teachers to support students to develop broader capabilities that will see them thrive academically and beyond. Teachers are grappling with implications for learning and assessment design, how to confidently provide opportunities for learners to learn, exercise and demonstrate these complex competencies. Students themselves recognise the narrowness of assessment and reporting, and they want a broader range of their strengths as learners to be seen and valued as they are in life beyond school. Parents want to feel confident that their child's school is supporting them to develop in ways that will provide them with opportunities in the future and now, that will stretch and inspire them, that will partner with home, that will strengthen those kind of partnerships at home on their intellectual and emotional development. They want, as do many educators, to value and recognise the whole child. And universities, selectors and employers, they tell us that they are increasingly interested in the work of schools to develop young people's broad strengths, that such capabilities are critical assets to the world of work and future study. In other words, many parts of the education ecosystem are grappling with the same underlying question: how do we recognise the full breadth of what young people know, can do, and are becoming as learners? The work combines both technical and human elements. The university has developed robust approaches to assessing complex competencies, while working closely with educators to co-design and strengthen resources that enable a shared language and professional development. In the next part of this webinar, Enterprise Professor Sandra Milligan will introduce some of the key principles that underpin this work. We hope this supports you and your teams to use the university's resources to bring to life the ambitions that you have for learners in your school. Thank you again for your interest in the work and for the commitment your school is showing to advancing such future-facing endeavours.
Thank you, Angela. As Angela said, I'm going to try and give you an understanding of the basic concepts that underpin this work. It's going to be a bit of a whistle-stop run through, I think I've counted 19 concepts that underpin our work. Each one of these ideas we could go a lot deeper on, but I'm just going to skim over the top so that you get an idea of the breadth and the depth of the work that we have with schools like you. One point I should make before I start is that the way we work at Melbourne Metrics is that we work always with schools. All of our research has been done with schools because the approaches need to be practical and able to be used in schools. So I would just like to mention that we honour the schools that we've been working with, particularly over the last 6 or 7 years. And everything I say, I think they would say too, and that we've developed these 19 concepts on the back of lots of their hard work. So before I start, thank you to all of those schools that we've worked with. We look forward to working with a lot more. And I'll start going through the concepts now. The first concept that I want to talk about is what these first mover schools who we've done our research with are actually doing that caused them, I think, to eventually turn up to an assessment research centre, which is what we are, and said we could do with some help here. In short, I think what they have been doing is transforming the way they teach, what they think about what they're teaching and how they teach it, away from the legacy of the 1880s, which is when our education systems were commenced, towards what schools really need now in the age when AI is ubiquitous, change is rapid, and schools are finding that they've got more people who are struggling to learn. So these first mover schools are moving from the 1880s legacy into what a modern education should look like. And on the slide here, I've just picked out a couple of the key things. I don't intend to go through them here, but you can use these slides if you wish to and get more of an idea. But this is what schools say they have been doing. Now, the reason they came to us was that while they were doing all of those things, particularly in curriculum reform and teaching reform, they kept bumping up against the assessment. And the assessment was typically of the sort that was around in the 1880s and the early 20th century, that is standardized tests, examinations, pencil and paper tests, and of course, the sorts of things that they were wanting to do can't be assessed in that manner. So they said, is it possible to develop some other metrics of learning that for the things we're now trying to teach kids, particularly transferable learning competencies so that they can learn anywhere, that parents will trust and students will trust and that have practical utility for everyone and does for other parts of learning what tests do for the content curriculum? Can we have something as robust as your typical assessment, but that goes to define a broader type of success for students? And that's what we've been embarking on, and that's the area of these 19 new concepts that I want to go through. The first concept, I'm just going to rattle through these now. The first concept is that actually schools should lead in system transformation, because it is schools who know their community, know their kids. Schools are not general outlets for a general product. They need to be able to work with their community to provide an education that reflects that. And that's certainly been an underpinning idea that has been underpinned our research. And furthermore, these schools are trying to do system transformation from system 1 to system 2 in their school, as Charlie Leadbeater calls it, and that the schools that we work with have an objective both to change the system for their own students, but also contribute to the system change so that other students can benefit equally with the students in their schools. So this idea that has underpinned our work is that schools are not independent, but schools are where the rubber hits the road, and we should all be working together to shift not only the work in a school to benefit the kids in a school, but also to try and shift the whole system so that all kids benefit. That's a key concept that's underpinned our work. So we don't shy away from what needs to change in the system, as well as what can be changed by school staff in a school. This slide is a core slide, and I guess it summarizes the research, the learning science research that underpins the work, and it focuses on what learners need to thrive or flourish at school and beyond. And it's based on the work of social psychologists over a 50-year period. I've got a reference down there at the bottom from Desi and Ryan if people want to follow up. But what they say is for anyone to thrive, if you want learners to thrive as learners, then they really only need three things. They need a sense of competence. They need to believe that they can do it. They need a sense of belonging to community and culture and class and school. And they need a degree of autonomy to act on their own or their community purpose, the thing that drives them. The curriculum manifestation of these three things are the blobs on the outside of that central circle. Obviously, in the curriculum, we want them to have the knowledge and the skill and the basic literacy and numeracy skills that they need to have a sense of thriving. But we also need these blobs on the left-hand side of the circle. Kids need to know how to learn if they're going to learn. They need personal virtues like persistence and integrity, and they need social skills like communication and collaboration, because that's how kids learn. They don't just learn as individuals on their own. They need interpersonal skills like empathy and being able to navigate diversity. They need to feel purposeful in their learning and to know why they're doing it. And they need to have critical and creative thinking skills, particularly in this age of scams and so forth. So the capacity to think critically is really important. We call these blobs on the left transferable learning competencies. And that's basically what we aim to measure, because it underpins most curricula around the world these days. In addition, I'll just point to this bit up here. We now know that it's not enough just to top kids up with learning. Learners need to learn to produce their own learning and not just be consumers of teaching. That means they have agency in their learning. So these concepts of agency in learning and transferable learning competencies and how you might assess and report on these is core to our work. This is a little map of what we mean by agency in learning. And you can see there we've got a developmental continua that shows how kids develop in their agency, the agency they take in their learning, from right at the bottom being really completely controlled by a directive, in a directive environment, when they're told what to do and they do it, and that's how they learn these tables, etc. At the middle, in level 3, these are probably the kids that you love to have in your class, if I'm honest, speaking as an ex-teacher. They're the ones who always put their hand up. They consume what you provide enthusiastically. They pass their tests, they practice, they do all of those things, but they're still consuming your teaching. Whereas what students need to be today is producers of learning, so that they can collaborate with others, they can seek their own feedback, that they understand how they learn, they can think things through. And it's this unbounded learner that we mean by a student who is very agentic. And the point is, you can teach kids how to get through level 1, 2, 3, 4, up to level 5 over time. And this is a core thing that that our first mover schools are saying to us: can you help us monitor and check this? And so assessment and reporting and so forth on agency in learning. And agency in learning includes, and this is scary for teachers, agency in assessment. And I've put some of the things on this slide that schools are trying and implementing to make sure that students have agency in assessment as part of their agency in learning. For instance, students as assessors, but also students curate their own evidence. They select their assessors, that is, someone who really knows them well, etc., etc. So this area of how to give students agency in assessment is a very interesting, reasonably new area that we're exploring with schools. Another key concept is that we're talking about competence, not just knowledge. So where, you can write a beautiful essay about something without being able to do it. Something that, say, medical education has known for a long time, that it's not good enough to be able to write an essay about the bones in the body. A good surgeon needs to actually know how to paste them together as well, and that's a different set of skills. So we're always talking about competence in learning, not just knowledge of learning. That becomes very clear, for instance, when you're talking about intercultural capability. Knowing how you should act is not the same as actually acting that way all the time. Key concept. Another concept that underpins it is that if you want to assess transferable learning competencies, you need to know what they are. And like if you test maths, you need to understand the discipline of mathematics. So it's the same with transferable learning competencies. You need to know what they are. We've built what we call an elemental architecture, which provides teachers and students with an understanding of the building blocks of these transferable competencies, and which provide a common language for talking about it across the school. If you work with us, you'll get to know these elements. They're quite fun, and use them and them with students and colleagues. And so they become the underpinning language and understanding that binds the activity across the school. Just got an example of a couple of them here. They're always our elements expressed in developmental terms, so that teachers can see what it looks like as students get better and better at any of these elements. I'll take the first one, feedback. So every teacher knows that feedback is vital, and being able to use it is vital for a kid to learn. But what does that mean, and how does it look like as kids get better at it? Here's our answer. To begin with, students will just take feedback and make adjustments to their work as instructed. At the highest level, however, they are agentic about it, and they establish feedback loops where they habitually ask for and provide feedback during their work. And so while feedback is an important element, you've got to dig underneath each of these elements to find out what it looks like in a developmental context. This is a pretty picture, the eighth concept, which is to say that these elements do not act on their own. They're not things found in nature, but they're ideas that are used to make up competencies like communication or ethical understanding, these big things that we want in our curriculum. But any of those competencies are made up of overlapping different combinations of elements. So in this graph, you can see here are some of the competencies that schools have in their competency frameworks, and these are all the elements and how they relate. And you can see that different elements contribute to a greater or lesser extent to different competencies, and they often overlap. So this is quite a sophisticated conception, but it makes it easy to talk across teachers and across curriculum areas when we know that this is the case. Depending on what school you're in, well, different schools use different competency frameworks always, we know that. And so these elements can be used to underpin any competency framework that you happen to be using. We usually start schools off with an off-the-shelf learning competency framework from Melbourne Metrics, which is fully supported, but other organisations have their own, whether it's the SACE board or big picture learning goals, or those schools who are in NPDL, or those who are using the general capabilities in the Australian curriculum, or those who are in special education. There are different frameworks, different competency frameworks, but they can all be underpinned by the same elemental structure, which helps the professional debate and also common standards to be developed. One of the things about competence is that it cannot, I stress this, be evidenced by essays, just essays or tests or exams, or really any artifact, because the competence is in the performance of learning. The competence can only be seen in the performance of learning. So we needed a different approach to assessment to be able to assess this. So this is my poem, which is really a definition of approaches to assessment of competence, abstracted, I might say, from our study of how medical schools assess the competence of medical practitioners before they're allowed out. So this is a definition of assessment that can be used for the assessment of learning competence before our learners are allowed out into the world to become self-promoting learners. And, you know, it just highlights some of the different features of this kind of assessment. So it's a process, not an event. And it gathers evidence of observing students in purposeful learning performances. Assessors use human judgment, so there's nothing automated about this. And they try and position learners on a scale of competence from less expert to more expert, which shows the learner and the teacher what the student knows, but also what they need to do next. In other words, it's a progression. with a sufficient degree of competence to empower the learner and support teaching and learning, and to provide recognition if it's required that other people can trust. So that's our definition of assessment, which is a bit different from give them a test or give them an essay. This is an example of a progression. This is the agency in learning progression for kids in years 9 to 12. So what you can see there is that these define the positions on which students are placed during the assessment, and the standards are the paragraphs at each level, and any student in years 9 to 12 could be placed at one of these standards so that they can see where they need to go next. So progressions are for each learning competence are a key component of our work. When it comes down to it, what do you do as a teacher or a student if you're actually assessing someone's level of performance on any of these competencies? The processes are very different. Because we're trying to get a 360 view of how a learner works across their whole learning experience. It's the whole of child assessment we're trying to get. It depends on multiple assessors who make those human judgments based on micro judgments of the performance and behaviour of students in the context within which they've seen them, using calibrated observation schedules that we've put together for various contexts, and a bit of technology that holds it together. So this assessment is different from your standard task that a teacher sets and then marks. So it's very different, and schools find it that they need to experiment and test with it and see how they can settle it into their processes. Reports, no scores, no ranking, no normative judgment. So the reports provide a profile of where the student is up to in each of these progressions for the competency framework that the school has adopted. We have them at different levels of precision, from reflective to formative to assessments for reporting, right up to credentialing. So there are different purposes, different forms of assessment for different purposes, but they're all profile based. They're all trying to capture where a student is up to in their competence on these standards, and they are designed to celebrate success rather than get kids a sense of where they sit in the ranking. It shows kids where they sit in their journey. One question we're often asked is, how do you treat kids at different ages and stages? Because obviously any school wants a line of sight for how students are developing. We have approaches and assessments that are based on the same philosophies for kids aged 3 up to well after their senior secondary years. And the interesting thing there is that these competencies are there in kids at a very early age. But what happens is that students become more and more sophisticated as the social environment, the intellectual environment, the emotional environment of their world changes, and they need to develop sophistication in each of these competencies. So it's not true to say that 3-year-olds can't be critical and creative thinkers, or that they can't be good collaborators, but the way that manifests is much more sophisticated in an 8-year-old or an 18-year-old than in a 3-year-old. So the idea is that we have instruments that can track a student through these ages and stages as their sophistication in each of these competencies develops. Another question we're often asked is, well, if you focus on these transferable learning competencies, will that mean that our NAPLAN scores go down, or that our ATAR will drop off, or whatever? The advice that we get from schools, and certainly the view that's consistent with the theory, is that there is no trade-off. It's a virtuous circle. Because if you have students who are extremely competent, self-directed learners who have agency in their learning, their performance in any learning task goes up. So if they don't have these skills, they may well pass their exams, but they are coached, compliant, and conscientious, and the chances of them thriving when they get out into the real world are not as great as if they've got these transferable learning competencies under their belt so that they know what to do and how to do it. Alternatively, there are some kids also who've got all the transferable learning competencies but do not apply themselves to schoolwork, in which they're the ones in the class that probably give you the most trouble because they're pretty skilled, but they're not connected to the school culture. Another concept underpinning our work is that there has to be something in this for everyone, and for students particularly, and it's got to give them a sense of pride and belief in who they are, what they're good at, and that they can be competent as learners, and that they belong in a community of learners, and that they have autonomy in a community of learners. For schools, they need to be able to show that they're making a difference in these areas, and that they've got something that can hold the robust, that can hold the staff together in their attempts to build the whole child's competence. And for people who are at the next stage of schooling, they need to be able to trust that these assessments are strong and true, and they do represent what a student knows and can do. Three more quick concepts. First, we've found that every school needs to find its own way in this. There's no one set way of doing it. And it usually takes some years of concerted leadership to take the school through the transformational change. So this is not a quick fix. Don't ring up today and expect to have it all sorted tomorrow. This is indeed a transformation of the learning design, the assessment design, the teacher's conception in some senses of what their job is for learners of today. We put a lot of effort, concept 18, in what's needed to be true if people external to the school, like parents or tertiary recruiters or teachers in the next school that your students graduate to, what has to be true if they're going to trust what you tell them about this student and use it? And we know that that's not a trivial question, and we know that that there needs to be clear connection between the learning design, the learning ambitions, the assessment design, that there needs to be control processes in place about the assessment. It's not just anything goes. That there is some science behind the assessments that need to be in place. So we do seek to help schools put in place what needs to be true for trust and utility. And I should point out that we do the assessment side, but the school leadership needs to do the learning design and the teacher support side. So it's a true partnership to get this going. And lastly, we are now in a position where we can provide a warrant for any credentials that are based on this approach that are used outside a school. We've got a system for trusting based on a joint judgment by the school and the university that these assessments can be trusted, and we called that a warrant. and from the university, and we can stick it on credentials if the things that need to be true are found to be true. I'm going to stop there. That was a whistle stop through 19 concepts. Please contact us if you were baffled or you think that something went wrong there. We love talking about this, and I look forward to talking with you more over the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you again for taking the time to engage with this introduction to the work of Melbourne Metrics, and thank you, Sandra. As you explore the tools that are available to you and the ideas and approaches discussed in this webinar, we very much welcome your reflections and feedback. One of the fundamental principles underpinning this work comes from validity theory, which reminds us that assessment systems must ultimately be judged not only by their technical quality, but by their impact in practice, how they are implemented, how they are used, and how they influence teaching, learning, and opportunities for students. So for us, that means continually paying attention to how these approaches work in real school contexts and how they can be strengthened so that they serve all students across all schools. We certainly won't always get everything right for everyone, but we are deeply appreciative of the opportunity to work alongside schools such as yours, and we see this work tackling this wicked societal problem as an ongoing collaboration between research institutions and those at the chalk face. So please do continue the conversation with us. Your insights, experiences, and questions are an essential part of how this endeavour evolves. Once again, thank you for your attention and collaboration, and all the best with the work.